This is Best Wrestling Podcast with your hosts, John McDonald and Matt Fitzgerald. And it begins now.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Best Wrestling Podcast special guest announcer.
It's now time for Best Wrestling Podcast. Oh, yes. Your hosts, Matt Fitzgerald and Jonathan McDonald. Oh, yes.
Well, we'd like to thank our special guest announcer. These guest announcers, I don't know where we're getting the budget. I don't know where we're getting the contacts to bring them in. We appreciate it. Another great job. Yes, it's Best Wrestling Podcast, and we are thrilled to be here tonight with you on the audio cyberspace airwaves because we have got a hell of a show and a very special guest. Isn't that right, Matt?
That is right. We are super excited to have Brady Roberts in studio with us tonight. Brady Malibu, the Malibu Beach bad boy. Brady, thank you for being here tonight with Best Wrestling Podcast.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Sorry, we've been trying to hook up for a little bit, but my schedule is just a little crazy. But it's good to be on here and talk wrestling.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to actually chat about just your schedule and some new and exciting things that have been coming up for you. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, we got Jonathan here in studio as well. So, Jonathan, how are you?
Doing great, and I'd like to thank Brady as well. He's an awesome guy and an awesome wrestler, so really excited to get going.
Thanks,
here.
Man. Thanks, man.
We did a little bit of extra recon on you today, so we've got our questions loaded and ready for the BWP universe. But I guess, Brady, even just personally, I mean, gosh, when was the last time that we had the opportunity to connect? It must be going on.
Oh God. Yeah. It's got to be over 5 years. I mean, I came to Vancouver 5 years ago, and before then I was in Calgary. So it's been, man, I don't know, 6-7 years. I'm not sure.
Wow. Yeah.
Quite
absolutely.
some time. Yeah.
Man, it goes by way too fast, huh?
As my previous lifeguard.
That's right. Absolutely.
Bodyguard manager. Yeah.
I know. I had a whole whopping, what was it? 2 shows. I think I did a Night of Champions and also I did Night of Champions in a ladder match. I took a nice little bump, and then as well a show in North Edmonton. That was my debut, actually. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate.
I feel like we also went. Did we not do like a small tour or something as well?
You're right. We did do a small tour.
Yes.
My God, I can't believe I forgot. That was North Alberta as well.
Yeah, or Saskatchewan or something. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Wow. So Brady, starting off our questions here, why don't you share with everybody really, I guess, where it all began? Like, where did your fandemonium start as a pro wrestling fan, and how did that translate into a part of your career being a pro wrestler?
Oh man. I mean, yeah, I've got kind of a crazy story, I guess, being so young, starting wrestling. But I mean, when I was a kid, I grew up, I have watched wrestling since I can remember. I mean, my dad would go to Stampede Wrestling growing up with his dad in Alberta. So they went to all the shows. So my dad was a big wrestling fan. So of course, when I was very young, I started watching wrestling with my dad. And we would do that together, and I was just totally obsessed, man. I grew up on wrestling video games. I had all the toys. I had the posters. I read the magazine. I was just obsessed with WWF, especially because we didn't get WCW until later in Canada. So growing up on that, I would go to Blockbuster Video and rent all the Coliseum video VHS tapes. I was especially enamored with like Bobby the Brain Heenan and some of the heels. So I loved all that stuff. I would specifically rent like VHS tapes just to listen to Bobby Heenan's commentary.
Wow.
Because a lot of the matches were just so horrible. And with the, like early 90s WWF, it was very like gimmicks were king, and a lot of the matches weren't so great. But, and then of course the rise of the internet and stuff, I'd beg my dad to let me use his credit card to order Japanese wrestling tapes off of High Spots and some of these like early websites that sold wrestling stuff. And this was in the early age of the internet where parents were like, I'm not giving you my credit card number to order something on the internet. Like, what is, like, my identity is going to be still, like stuff like that. So really funny. But yeah, man, like I grew up in the theater. I'm an actor, which is something else we can talk about as well. But I grew up acting in the theater. My parents were both theater actors as well. My dad still does a lot of stuff with the Fringe Festival and everything. So I grew up as an actor and played a lot of sports growing up. So I had some athleticism as well, combined with the acting stuff. So I think wrestling was.
And Brady, I just want to pick up on something that you said.
Yeah.
I came across a note on the interwebs today, which is obviously a very reliable source, that said you started when you were 15 in the wrestling business.
Yeah.
Wow.
So actually even younger. I had my first match at 15. But so what happened was I had a group of friends, of course, that we loved wrestling, and we were, in junior high, the four of us together, and we'd watch all the pay-per-views and play the video games and all that stuff. So my dad, again, being a big wrestling fan, was in college and went to college with a guy named Robert O'Keefe. And Robert O'Keefe was a major wrestling fan. And years later, Robert bought a wrestling ring and started a wrestling camp in Edmonton. And at the time, there was no wrestling camps in Edmonton. There was the Hart School and everything in Calgary, but in Edmonton, where I grew up in Sherwood Park outside Edmonton. So in Edmonton, there was nothing there. There was no independent wrestling or anything. I think PWA had just started at that time, and I'd gone to one or two shows, but I don't think they had an active camp at that time. I could be wrong, but it's many years ago. So anyway,
can you explain to us, like, in terms of, I guess, how you find out about the camp, what your first day is like? Because to me, that's always so fascinating.
Yeah.
Like the first day story, the first bump, all that stuff.
What would happen was my dad, because he was such good friends with Rob, and Rob owned the wrestling camp, I would get to go down and watch the wrestling camp. I wasn't allowed to wrestle because I was too young. I was like 12 or 13 at this time, right? And so Rob started running shows in Edmonton. He ran some shows at Festival Place in Sherwood Park. He ran shows at, I want to say it was called Reds at West Edmonton Mall. Is that still a thing? Reds Entertainment.
That sounds very,
yes. So he ran shows at West Edmonton Mall. And what I would do is I'd go to the shows and I would stand at the door and take tickets. And then me and my other buddies that were wrestling fans, we were all 13, 14 years old. We would go in the ring between matches and sweep the ring. We would set the ring up. We'd take the ring down. We did all the bitch work, right? We'd sell tickets. We did everything. So we were just like the kids hanging around, like just trying to be a part of the wrestling company, right? So we'd go watch the camp. And finally, after quite some time of just watching, we'd get in the ring and start doing somersaults and stuff like that. And we were kind of athletic-ish. So I remember Rob said, you know what, on Saturday mornings, you guys can have your own class. We'll bring a couple of the guys and they'll just teach you just basic chain wrestling and stuff like that. Cause we were just begging him, like, come on, like, please let us wrestle. Right. So
did you kind of have like a moment? Obviously, you're a big fan, so you might appreciate the business enough that you didn't even need to go through this. But I know in my experience talking to a lot of guys who go to a camp or whatnot, they get in there and they think, I can do a moonsault, watch this, or I can do a shooting star, watch this. And then the guy's like, I want to see you lock up. Like, let's see you collar and elbow. Like, did you have to kind of get toned down and just learn the basics first? Like, what was that process like?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I've never like been a really big move kind of guy. Like, I've always been more into like the psychology of the characters and stuff like that. I just remember, like, the thing is, after we briefly started training at this, it was called CCW, Canadian Championship Wrestling was the company in Edmonton, but it folded shortly after. And so we had very minimal training there. And then in its ashes or whatever came Monster Pro Wrestling, which I think is still running in Edmonton. And we'd been training with this guy, JD Michaels, who is still a really good friend of mine. I talk to him every day, who lives down in Florida now. But he was training at CCW, and he said, you guys should come over and train at Monster Pro. So same thing. We went over, we started training at Monster Pro Wrestling. We're training 5 nights a week. Now we're 14, 15 years old. And what happened was Monster Pro Wrestling had booked a show in Edmonton in February. This is February 2000. Oh God, I'm going to age myself here. February 2003. So 15 years ago now, almost exactly, right?
Wow.
And because it is February in Canada, there was a major snowstorm. And Monster Pro was a relatively new company, so they didn't have enough guys. So they were bringing in carloads of guys from either Saskatchewan or Winnipeg for every show to round out the roster, which is where I got to know Kenny Omega quite well.
Very cool.
Yeah. So it's funny because me and Kenny bonded a lot over our obsession with Japanese wrestling. So we would talk a lot about Toriumon, which was Ultimo Dragon's company, and a lot of these weird Japanese wrestling tapes that we were watching, right?
Wow. So incredible.
Yeah. So February 2003, so this snowstorm hits. This carload of guys from Winnipeg can't come to the show. And they say, well, shit, we don't have enough guys for the show. So there's 3 of us in the camp that were under 18. They said, we're just going to put you guys in a triple threat match. And we're like, oh shit, we're 15 years old. We've been training for a year, but we didn't even have wrestling gear or anything because we didn't think like we'd be debuting until we were like 18, right? We were sort of casually training, thinking like they're never going to let us actually wrestle because we're too young.
And Brady, when you're doing this, out of curiosity, what is? I got to ask, what do your friends and your family think? You're at this age, you're starting to actually train for wrestling. You know, did you come across resistance, or did you have a lot of people supporting you before you were able to have that match?
Well, thankfully, I mean, my dad, brought me to wrestling camp and stuff when I was young because he was friends with Rob, right? And I think that he hung around a little bit and I think felt safe with everything that was happening. And, but yeah, I mean, it's a miracle that they allowed me to do that at that age and, paid for my wrestling camp and stuff while I was doing that. But I think it just gave me something to do that was keeping me out of trouble. And I was there like 5 nights a week and often on Saturdays. So it was great exercise. It was something for me to do. It was something I was doing with a few of my friends. And it kept me out of trouble, right? I mean, I missed a lot of stuff in high school, a lot of parties. I missed my graduation. I was away wrestling, stuff like that. Not the graduation ceremony, but the party thing. And so, it made for an interesting kind of time. But and I had a group of friends that was really supportive. But of course, I'm sure there was people that thought it was really weird.
And so with your impromptu debut here, I mean, it's got to be nerve-wracking enough to do your first singles match, but now your first match is going to be a triple threat, which I would just guess is a more difficult concept to pull off even for sure. Experienced people. And now it's going to be your first match. So how does that go?
I thought it went really smooth because what we did was we did have the benefit of being able to rehearse it every single day in class, which I personally don't recommend because I think there's such a beautiful art of going out and having a match that is far less rehearsed. But we did rehearse it, and actually somewhere I have a VHS tape at my parents' house somewhere of we actually filmed a rehearsal match so at the camp so we could watch it back and make sure that it was right. But we had like a 6 or 7 minute match. But what happened was we actually got over because again, we were watching so much Japanese and Mexican wrestling, and Monster Pro was a lot of big guys. It was like Monster Pro Wrestling. It was supposed to be all giant guys, right?
And Brady, I just wanted to ask you on this, because you keep bringing it up and I don't want to forget it because it's such an interesting point. And I think it's really topical given the debate that I sometimes see today. You said, I was never a big flashy move guy. I appreciate the psychology. So do you sometimes, I don't know if disheartened's the right word, but do you get a little disheartened when like a lot of indie guys unfortunately bring indie wrestling a little bit of a bad name by just going in there and doing every single high spot they can think of without selling or telling a story?
Yeah. And I think, and again, this is stuff we can get into later. I mean, we might need like 10 podcasts to cover my wrestling career because it was a long time and it did, span a lot of places and stuff. But I'd say one of the reasons I'm not currently wrestling really is because I became sort of, I guess disheartened probably is the right word, about the state of wrestling that it is now. And I see it even a lot in WWE now. I don't watch a ton of WWE anymore, to be honest. I haven't in a lot of years. I do quite enjoy NXT because I feel like there's a more simplistic storytelling there and a great psychology that still exists. But there's certainly a lot of times in wrestling where I watch it and I think like, to me, it's too much now about the moves and less about the story.
Brady, tell me a little bit more about that. Like really, because it's such a great topic, like deep dive into that and tell me about maybe some specifics of what you've seen and maybe what you would do different if you were controlling the ship.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, especially on the independent level for sure, but I definitely see it in WWE. But I mean, on the independents, for example, like the last few years that I was wrestling, I mean, I would go to shows and I would essentially, like, I'd talk to the guy that I was going to have a match with that night. And it was all I would hear is like, I want to do this move, this move, this move. And my approach is always like, what's the story that we're telling tonight? So for me, it's a backwards process, right? I have to find out from the booker or promoter or whoever's booking the show that night, what is it that you're trying to accomplish in this match? Okay, we need to do this for the finish because it's going to lead to this. Okay, cool. So now we're going to go backwards from the finish to decipher how we're going to get to that. What happens 98% of the time with guys now is they think of cool moves or cool sequences that they have seen or have come up with in their mind or whatever that they want to do to get a quick pop. And there's an insane amount of athleticism right now in wrestling. It's crazy, some of the stuff that's happening, and a lot of it looks really cool. It looks flashy. It looks like a video game. But to me, wrestling, like, you guys tell me, what's the definition of wrestling? What is pro wrestling? If you were going to explain it to an alien that had never seen pro wrestling before, what is pro wrestling?
Well, Brady, I mean, I don't know if I could come up with a definition, but I could come up with a match that totally encapsulates what you're saying. And I just watched it the other day, and it's like, it's Rock and Hogan from Mania X8, where there's like probably 5 total wrestling moves. Yeah. But obviously the crowd is, psyched to begin with. They got a huge advantage going in because of their names, but the way that they worked that crowd, it just is a clear-cut example in my mind. And I also wanted to ask you, I guess, on that front, do you think that, sometimes fans are contributing to this with like every match getting a "this is awesome" chant or for sure, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the fandom is really interesting. Again, I feel disheartened. It's like, I feel like this like old bitter man when I talk about wrestling, and I'm not. I love wrestling. Wrestling is such a huge part of my life. And again, we can talk later about some of the things I'm doing right now that still involve wrestling, actually. Wrestling is a huge part of my life. I love wrestling, so I don't want to speak negatively about that too much, but some of the fandom, I think, is a little extreme. But that also
let's talk about, because I mean, you did have a really, really interesting career. I don't want to use the word career, maybe, because obviously you might return, never say never, but from the Triple Threat and over the next couple of years, where does your journey take you, as much as you can concisely tell us? Where do you go after your debut?
Yeah, I'm just going to finish one note first before I jump back to that. Sure. As far as like what wrestling is, in my mind, wrestling is we are simulating a fight between two guys, a contest. I think maybe fight is the wrong word, but an athletic contest, right? So someone is trying to win that contest. So I think when I see matches now, especially on the independents, where they take it sometimes to the extreme with where they're doing spots in slow motion, or they're doing, getting choke slammed from the Invisible Man, or doing these ridiculous sort of things. Yeah. And now, on a side note to that, like I was often a comedy wrestler, especially later in my career, playing this Brady Malibu swimsuit model character. So I love comedy in wrestling, but I think it has to be done in a really specific way. And some of this stuff, I think that fans are marking out for and retweeting and stuff like that is I often find more harmful to the business than not, because it alienates the casual viewer who's like, this is just too stupid. So I think we've hit a point sometimes where it's too stupid, and we've lost the idea of wrestling, which is a contest. Someone's supposed to win. We should be trying to win, not anyway,
totally. I couldn't agree with you more. And Jonathan, I think this is a great time for maybe me to plug my favorite pay-per-view of all time, WrestleMania X7. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I love about my wrestling so much is the story. I remember that angle, and it looked like Austin and The Rock legitimately wanted to kill each other, and they would do whatever it took in order to win that, so poetically, like you said, that contest there, Brady. And I think, if anything, you're right. That's what we need injected back a little bit more into the world of sports entertainment and pro wrestling. Getting back to, we're at that 3-way dance match. Yes. We're having that triple threat. How do you go from that? And then also, I'm so curious to know, how do you develop the gimmick of Brady Malibu? How do you become the Malibu Beach bad boy?
Yeah, I mean, that took a few years for sure. I mean, for the first few years, I was just wrestling as Brady Roberts, which is my real name. So I was working for Monster Pro Wrestling, and essentially what happened is after about a year of doing shows for Monster Pro, Massive Damage, who was the promoter and head trainer of Monster Pro Wrestling and owner, essentially cracked down on all of us and told us like we weren't allowed to wrestle anywhere else without his permission. So a group of us, I think there were 6 or 7 of us, got together and said, we're leaving because we're independent wrestlers. We're not going to be told we can or can't wrestle somewhere else because we need to get experience. We need to learn. We need to travel. We need to wrestle other guys, more experienced guys, to get better. And we were told we were not allowed to do that. So we all quit at the same time. We started wrestling for a company called RCW, Real Canadian Wrestling. And then very quickly after that, we went to, at least a few of us went to PWA, Prairie Wrestling Alliance. So, yeah. And then from there, I mean, I started wrestling in BC and Saskatchewan, traveling to Winnipeg. So I was traveling a lot. And again, you know, I'm 16, 17 years old. So I'm traveling, I'm missing school, traveling as a wrestler on the weekends, and then attending high school during the week. Right. So kind of an interesting lifestyle.
Was there ever any concern, you know, with you being a minor? One, did promoters know it? And two, would they have been concerned like, oh my God, please don't get injured out there. It would be such a disaster for us. Like, did that ever cross their mind?
I mean, all the promoters knew that I was a minor, and there were some other minors that were traveling wrestling and stuff. I was certainly one of the youngest wrestlers in Canada, probably ever, as a handful of us. But as far as like injury, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think probably now people are more worried about that stuff. I feel like in the earlier 2000s or mid 2000s, people weren't as worried about lawsuits and unsafe work environments. They probably should have been, but no one really ever. I would imagine signed waivers and
question.
Stuff, but,
like the pay always has to be discussed when discussing the indie part of the career. Are we talking $15-$20 a match here?
My first handful of matches for Monster Pro, again, this Massive Damage character was quite a character. The first year I wrestled for him, I did not get paid because his response was, well, you guys are still in training, so you don't get paid when you're in training. But I mean, we were indefinitely in training, so I don't know how that works. But I think we were allowed to take a can of Coke from the concession.
Oh my God!
Legitimately, that's
the best one ever. That's
the winner. That's the winner.
So after 2 years, I started wrestling for Stampede Wrestling, which had been relaunched in Calgary. And oddly enough, for the first while I wrestled for Stampede Wrestling, Bruce Hart was booking and didn't like my name, Brady Roberts. So he renamed me in Stampede Wrestling as Brady Anderson. So I had a brief run for about 6 months as Brady Anderson in Stampede Wrestling. Supreme jobber, I'm sure. But in Stampede, I was getting paid $5 per match, which was often in coins.
just taken from the merch coin purse or where was that from the canteen?
Keep in mind, we were driving ourselves down to Calgary every weekend to do that. So we're actually losing money because we're paying for gas and food and, taking the day off work to go do that.
That's right. Absolutely. Brady, do you see like within the business, a lot of that's still going on? And is that just because it's not turning a profit, or is it because of maybe just some greed?
I think it's a combination I think it's mostly the boys have put themselves into that situation, because what's happened, and sort of what you're talking about with the fandom and stuff as well, is, I'm going to say, unfortunately, some people may disagree, but I'm going to say, unfortunately, a lot of people are in the industry that should be fans and maybe not in the industry. And what's happening is guys have allowed themselves to be prostituted for a long time for no money. And guys will come in and say, I'll work for cheaper. I'll work for free. I'll work for $5, whatever. And I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen guys walk up to promoters and say, like, I will work cheaper tonight if you book me, or you don't need to pay me. And like, I've seen this before.
Wow.
Because they think of it as, well, if I just get this opportunity, then I can, but what happens is the promoter goes, oh, well, that's an extra bit of money in my pocket. And then they start to use guys that are cheap or free.
So it's almost like a race to the bottom, essentially, where you're just trying to get some spotlight, and you're cutting and cutting and cutting, and you just go to zero.
Even if you look at WWE, I have a lot of friends that work at WWE. They're recording record profits and record revenues, but they're paying a lot of their guys less than ever, especially on the low end of the card. Right, their downside guarantees are significantly lower to my knowledge. Not to say that you can't make a lot of money there. A lot of guys do make a lot of money there. I'm not saying that, but I think that guys are accepting less money than ever because they see everything as an opportunity, and they're just such a big fan that they want to work as a wrestler.
So Brady, on that note, then, would you advise someone who's getting into the wrestling business to be confident enough in their ability that they shouldn't be afraid to ask for what they deserve?
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, of course, when you first start, you have to work for less or whatever. I don't think anyone should be working for free or for a can of Coke. Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything else in life, right? Sometimes you got to stand up for yourself, and you got to know what you're worth. And if you're not getting that, then you got to be confident enough to walk away from that situation.
Brady, I came across a note, and we might debunk some, we might prove some true, but I'll spit it out and you tell me if it's an internet rumor or if it's real. It said on one site that you were trained by both Lance Storm and Carl Anderson. Is that true?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So when I was, I'm trying to think of this timeline. I don't want to mash it up on my head. So I'm wrestling for PWA. I'm wrestling down. There was a new company that had started in Lethbridge, Power Zone Wrestling, which I worked for quite some time. And so I went down to live in Los Angeles for 3 months with a guy named Lee Coyle, who wrestled as Lee Montana from Montana, and Tom LaRufa, who was in WWE and went to Impact. He was one of the French guys. We went down to live in Los Angeles. So we trained at what before we got there, it was the New Japan Dojo. And then became a different thing. So we trained with Rocky Romero, with TJ Perkins, and with Carl Anderson. Wow. Right before Carl went to New Japan, and Rocky, I think, went to New Japan right after that as well. So we trained with them, and I moved to Calgary shortly after I was 18 to train with Lance Storm, relatively full time. I mean, we had an advanced class with Lance for some time in the afternoons. So he would train his new students in the morning, and then we would train with him in the afternoon. So I was training with, Rick Victor, who is in the Ascension. Tyler Breeze was there, Derek Cross, some of these other guys, Carlo Cannon, Tom LaRufa. Teo Valkyrie was in there.
Unbelievable, Brady. And tell our listeners, what's it like being around Lance in that environment? Like, how does he operate his training? Is he a hard ass? Is he, a coach? Like, what's it like working with him?
I would say, cardio wise, the training I did in Los Angeles was the hardest I've ever done, because it was very New Japan style. We did a shitload of squats. We would do 500 free squats to start the class.
Wow.
Hundreds of push-ups, hundreds of sit-ups, skipping, you're jumping over the ropes back and forth, tons of you'd run the ropes for 3 minutes straight kind of thing. Like, you're sweating like a madman. I also did some lucha training down there, which was really cool. Lots of different flips and rolls and stuff. So Lance's classes weren't as difficult cardio wise, but the thing I love about Lance, and I think Lance is the best trainer in the world, and I've spent a lot of time training with him. The thing that I love about Lance is that Lance does not sugarcoat anything. He will tell you straight up, that sucks. He will tell you, I've seen him tell people, this business is not for you. It's absolutely not your thing. Where the other thing is a lot of guys that are running wrestling camps are so desperate to have students because they pay them. Where Lance has a waiting list of students, and Lance doesn't need the money. So Lance will tell you that sucks, or Lance will tell you this business is not for you. He doesn't sugarcoat it, which I love. So keep in mind that when I went to train with Lance, I'd already been wrestling for years. So I had I was humble enough to say, I want to go back to wrestling school and learn from this guy, because he was training. He was the head trainer at OVW and knew exactly what WWE was looking for.
And
Gotcha.
okay, so what was one of the things, if anything, I mean, maybe you had it at that point, but what was something that he said to you, okay, this is kind of sucking a bit, improve this?
Yeah, I mean, I think just a lot of fundamentals, because at the time, again, like when I was trained in Edmonton, I was trained by a lot of other independent wrestlers.
Right.
So they hadn't really done much, and again, that's not a knock on them. It's just, they were pretty green themselves. And then they're teaching at a camp because, again, you gotta turn a profit. You got to bring new students in. Right. So just a lot of the basic fundamentals. And that's the thing that Lance is the biggest on. He spends the most time. He spends 3 months with his classes, just fundamentals. So by the time you get out of that class, like your fundamentals are sound in your psychology. And the psychology was the biggest thing. Like, he really taught me how to tell a story in the ring.
Well, but I'm going to actually take advantage of how well you defined wrestling. You laid the smackdown on me and whooped my ass. That was a beautiful definition. So I want to try to, because I've never been able to kind of explain it to someone, and but I know it's there. What would you say ring psychology is? How would you define psychology in wrestling?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's no different than the psychology of telling a story, whether that be a movie or a book or a theater play or whatever, right? You have to have, like, your hero has to go on a journey, right? So we need to like that person immediately. We need to see that person succeed. We need to see that person then fail and be knocked down. And we need to have some moments of really believing that person is going to lose. And then hopefully we need to see that hero rise up again. And whether the end of the match is the hero winning and defeating the villain, or the villain screws him over and, like, goddamn, next Friday I want to come back and see that guy get his revenge.
Wow, I appreciate you. Right? That is a great, incredible way to describe it, Brady. With that being said, yeah, when it comes to playing the heel or the face, what one did you enjoy playing more, and why?
Yeah, I probably spent the first half of my wrestling career as a babyface, generally because I was small and young and I hope good looking, I guess. So, I was kind of like, fiery young babyface, right? And I hadn't really found my footing as a heel. But the second half of my career, when I transitioned into playing Brady Malibu, which is kind of when I came back from training in California, I wanted to reinvent myself as that character. So, man, I don't know. It's tough to say, because I want to say probably a heel, because when you're a heel, you're more in control of the match. The heel is typically dictating the pace and controlling the crowd. And, you've got the crowd in the palm of your hands. A great babyface can as well. But I think I felt more in control of every situation as a heel.
So, Brady, to try to tie that into another issue that I've been noticing with the modern product, do you think it's problematic that we have Roman Reigns and John Cena, who are positioned, I guess, as top baby faces, but are quite frankly booed throughout? And if they're wrestling as a baby face who makes comebacks, but are booed when they make those comebacks, is the whole thing just thrown out of whack?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because again, I work a lot in TV and film now, and producing my own projects and writing with various writers out here. And I think the most interesting thing is finding shades of gray within characters. But I think the issue with maybe Reigns and Cena and stuff, who are both, incredible performers, is a lot of just oversaturation, right? So I'm a huge fan of Game of Thrones, but if I had to watch like 12 hours of Game of Thrones every week, starring Jon Snow for most of those hours, I'd probably get sick of Jon Snow, right?
Great point.
So
Great point.
I think that the oversaturation, and there's no off season, there's no resting, there's just constantly more product. I know for me, myself, like, again, I don't watch a lot of the current product. Part of that is because I'm not as interested in the style of wrestling and the way they book the shows and stuff now. But a lot of it is just also just oversaturation. Like, I don't have time. Like, who has time to watch that much wrestling?
Very interesting point that you bring up there, Brady. And to just segue actually into a couple of questions that we had come in from myself and Jonathan that came into Twitter and Instagram. I've had a couple of people that wanted to ask, and I'll just kind of lob some of these questions at you. Sure. One question we had coming from Instagram, once again, that's Best Wrestling Podcast on Instagram, ladies and gentlemen, was what was it like when you took your first bump? And then second part to this question, I guess, would be what was the hardest bump that you've ever taken?
Oh man. Yeah. My first bump, to be honest, like I don't remember my first bump. I mean, I'd say I was probably 13 or 14 years old, I'd say. I would imagine painful, probably uncomfortable. But I don't specifically remember. I remember like the old shitty garage that we would train in and stuff like that, but I don't remember my exact specific, first bump. Hardest bump I've ever taken. Man, there's a clip of it somewhere on YouTube. I don't know where, but it was horrible. We did I was wrestling in Stampede Wrestling in Calgary, a tag team match, and Juggernaut had lifted me up, I want to say like onto his shoulders, kind of like Doomsday Device position. And Pete Wilson, who was a Stampede guy, did like a flipping blockbuster. That's the right move? Buff Bagwell did that move, the blockbuster. Yeah. Off the top. Onto me, off of Juggernaut's shoulders, and I essentially went straight up and down on my head.
Oh my God.
Nasty bump. And I narrowly, like I was totally fine, but I think I just narrowly missed, breaking my neck.
Unbelievable.
Stuff like that. I mean, I've taken bumps on the floor that were pretty rough. I've been put through tables. I've bumped onto a ladder, which is never good. It's very unforgiving.
So, and I'm going to come at you with one. I'm going to come at you with a couple, I guess, that I know you might get these a lot, but actually now that we've learned just how big of a fan you are, how much you appreciate everything, I'm quite interested. And this one's from Twitter. And it's from @JohnW5. And he says, what's your favorite match ever? But now that we know how much you appreciate just good wrestling and psychology, now I'm really interested in hearing that.
Yeah, man. I would say, what? I love the Shawn and Taker matches from WrestleMania.
Nice.
That are 1 and 2. Those are absolutely amazing. I also loved Eddie Guerrero and Kurt Angle at WrestleMania. That was at WrestleMania 20.
You got it, 20.
WrestleMania 20, yeah, WrestleMania 20. Where, Eddie slips the boot off and escapes the ankle lock. Like, just awesome stuff. Like, Eddie is one of my favorites of all time, as is Kurt Angle. So, yeah, you took care of the next two.
You took care of the next two because the next one I have on the sheet here is who are your favorites. So,
I mean, man, like, I got to say Eddie Guerrero for sure, Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair. These guys had, like, you think of the four names I just mentioned, like, not only were they fantastic wrestlers, but they had a personality and a presence and just like and they all sort of played a similar character too, right? That kind of like that type of heel. And that's what I always strive to be. I think I took a little bit from all of those characters. You got to kind of bump your ass off and make the baby face look great, but you got to be kind of slimy and conniving in that way. And I think it takes a special kind of personality and a special kind of athlete to pull that off.
Wow. Brady, the next question we have coming at you from Instagram would be, what would your proudest moment be in the career that you've had thus far when it comes to pro wrestling?
Oh man, proudest moment. When I did do quite a bit of work for WWE, whether it was having tryout matches or working as an extra. You'll see me a handful of times, probably on the WWE network somewhere, standing against a wall as a guy walks down a hallway or something like that. I played security guards and all that kind of stuff. When I was 17, so I've been wrestling for 2 years, I found a WWF magazine in my closet and I looked up the address to WWF headquarters in Stamford and I mailed them a VHS tape of a match that I had with JD Michaels. And Tommy Dreamer called me. He was in talent relations at the time. And he was like, I think this match is great. You've got your guys' fundamentals is awesome. I like it a lot. He's like, we're coming to Edmonton and we'd like to see you there. And I was 17 and I didn't tell him. Wow. I didn't tell him I was 17. He's like, how old are you, kid? I was like, I'm 19. I was 17. But the show was just after my 18th birthday. So it was SmackDown in what would have been 2005, I think, is when I turned 18. I'm old now. I'm 30 now. So, so I show up to SmackDown and, you know, my name's on the list. I'm supposed to be there. And I show up and, you know, I had my suit on and my gear and stuff. And I had my first WWE tryout at 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. And
unbelievable.
I remember I walked out and I was walking around just looking at everything, you know, because the first time, you know, anyone who's ever been backstage at WWE or had a tryout match or anything, like you just walk around and you're like, oh my God, like this is it, man. Like you are like, this is what you've watched your whole life. And now you're standing in that ring. You're looking up at the, you know, it was the SmackDown entranceway at the time. And
who was your opponent in your tryout match?
So this is a good story actually for you. But but before that, I'm standing on the entranceway and I'm looking out to the ring. And again, I'm 18 years old. And who walks up next to me to my left is Vince McMahon. Walks up to me. And I'm standing there looking at the ring, the SmackDown ring, and I turn and Vince is standing right beside me. Like I don't know if he thought I was someone else that he knew or something. He's just standing there looking. And and I was like, going to be a great show tonight. That's what I said to Vince. and Vince was just like, yeah, yes, it is. And like, that was it. I was like, it's like, you're 18. You've been watching this guy since you're a kid. You're thinking like, man, I'd love to work here. It's like, I didn't have anything good to say. I was like, going to be a great show. I didn't even know what matches were going to be on the show that night. How would I know how would I know what was going to be on the show? So then anyway, so that was my moment with Vince McMahon, my one and only moment. And so then I go put my wrestling gear on. They said, go down to the ring. And I go down to the ring, and around the ring, I think there were 6 of us. There was me, there was Harry Smith, TJ Wilson, Natalia Neidhart, JD Michaels was there, and a guy named Kid Nichols, who's Devin Nicholson, who's done quite a lot since that time. And I remember looking around the ring, and I'd kind of wrestled around with everybody. And I remember, and Teddy Hart was there. And I remember thinking, so essentially how tryout matches used to work is before the show, and they may still do this, I'm not 100% sure, but you'd be standing around the ring and the agents would be there, Dean Malenko, Fit Finley, those guys, Arn Anderson, Sergeant Slaughter was there at the time. And they would look around and they'd say, okay, you and you get in there right now. You got 3 minutes. And you would jump in the ring with someone who you may have never met in your life, and you get a 3-minute match, and that's it.
Wow.
And I'm looking around the ring and I'm thinking like, so they're starting to pair guys up, and I'm thinking anyone but Ted. Brady, you and Ted going at it right now. So my first tryout match at 18 in WWE ring was against Teddy Hart. So really? I get in with Ted, and of course I've heard all the stories and you know, been around, and Ted is a wild man, an absolute wild man. And so I start wrestling with Ted, and of course I'm nervous because I'm like, I've never wrestled this guy before. I just turned 18. I just talked to Vince McMahon and fucked it up, and I have no idea what's happening. So Ted, I proceed to have like a 3-minute match with Ted, and I could not tell you anything that happened in that match because Ted was just doing stuff to me. Like I would try to like wrestle with him, and he'd just give me like a weird move or give me like some kind of weird flipping powerbomb thing. Like I didn't even know what was happening, right? And that was kind of it. And then we go back to the. And I remember Johnny Ace came in and said, "We need somebody to do the job tonight." To John Heidenreich, who was getting a push at the time.
Oh, a wrestling legend, I said, I'll do one of the most technically sound wrestlers of all time.
Heidenreich. And I said, I'll do it. And I kind of thought for a minute I was going to get to do it. And because I, put my name in the hat first. And then they went with Devin Nichols because he's a bigger guy. So they put him in with John Heidenreich. But anyway, that whole story was about my interaction with Vince. But the Ted story was pretty great too. So that's not my proudest moment, but that's kind of a hilarious moment, I get.
Unbelievable. That's pretty incredible. Another question that we actually had come in from Instagram as well. Yeah. And the last story that you shared was actually pretty hilarious, but we also had this question come in, and it's, what's your funniest memory with a WWE superstar?
Oh, I got a good one for you. Actually, this is pretty good. You guys might not laugh. I don't know. I thought it was funny, but so I was wrestling in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I was with a carload of guys from Canada. We were down there wrestling, and we were looking at the WWE schedule of where they were. And we said, oh, these guys are going to be in California. We were in Salt Lake City Saturday, Sunday wrestling. And we said, oh, they've got Raw in California on Monday. which is nowhere close to Salt Lake City. But, we were desperate young indie wrestlers, and we figured like maybe we can just show up to Raw and have it, we want to get a tryout match. So we drove 12 hours after our show in Salt Lake City down to the Staples Center in Los Angeles. And we had our suits in our bags. And at this time, security was a lot looser at the time. You definitely couldn't get away with this now, but we snuck in to Raw backstage. So we put our suits on in the car, and we pulled our wheelie bags out, and we tried our best to act like we were legit wrestlers. And we just walked backstage past security, and they let us in. And so anyway, we had these little tryout matches in the ring, and eventually someone realized that we weren't supposed to be there. So they had someone from the office come down and talk to us and said, "Hey guys, we don't see you on the list of guys that are supposed to be here. Like, who sent you here?" And we said, we didn't want to get in trouble with Lance in Calgary, right? We said, we trained with Lance in Calgary, but he didn't send us here, but we just showed up hoping we could get like an opportunity. And they said, okay, well, that's fine. But, you guys aren't on the list. So we got to ask you to leave. So we said, okay. And we didn't want to get in any trouble or anything like that. So we ran back to the locker room. We put our suits back on, and we were wheeling our fucking bags out of there. And we're in the parking lot where this is like 3 p.m. right? So it's nowhere close to showtime. So we're walking out of the parking lot, and who do we pass in the parkade? Who's walking in is Ron Simmons, Farouk. He said, "Where are you guys going? It's not anywhere near showtime. Why are you leaving?" And we said, "Well, we tried to sneak in, and we had a little tryout match, and then we got kicked out. So we got to leave." And he just stopped, and time stood still, man. And he just looked at me, and he said, "Damn." And then he walked away, and that was my one moment with Ron Simmons, man. So
that is a good moment.
I got the damn treatment from Ron Simmons because I got kicked out of Raw.
Well, if you're gonna have one moment with Ron Simmons, you might as well have the damn moment.
It was like
Brady,
time stood still.
That's incredible, Brady. We're getting in the studio here. We're getting what we like to call the go home wave from our producer Fred. But we wanted to first off, we wanted to say how much we appreciate you being here today. This added a pile of value to our fans. And if it's okay with you, we would love to have you back to pick your brain on many topics. But before we wrap up here today, Brady, tell our fans what's new in the world of Brady Roberts. Tell us what you're excited about. And if anybody ever wanted to connect with you, where can they look for more information on Brady Roberts? And we'll make sure we put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. I mean, I did a TV show several years back called World of Hurt with Roddy Piper, which was a wrestling TV show, which was very fun. We'll have to post a link to that. But after that, I really started doing a lot of work in film. So acting, TV, film. I got agent, took, TV and film classes, all that stuff. And then I started producing my own content as well. So I produced a web series about Nightwing, which is the DC Comics character. I produced quite a few short films and web series and stuff. So about 5 years ago, I moved to Vancouver, and I've been working in film ever since. Lots of different movies and shows, some of which you've heard of, some of which no one has ever heard of. But you can see all that on my IMDb. My Instagram and Twitter is at Brady Malibu. And I'm just producing. So I started a production company here. We're working on a few different TV shows that we're currently pitching, some of them which are wrestling related, which is a lot of fun, doing a comedy show about wrestling and stuff like that. So still very heavily, thinking about wrestling all the time. So,
and is that the right URL that I have on my show notes here, BradyRoberts.com? Very simple and effective. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. There's not much on there, but that'll have my resume and some pictures and stuff. But yeah, my Instagram is at Brady Malibu, as is my Twitter. So you can kind of keep up to date on there to what I'm doing and what film projects I'm working on.
Great. Well, man, look, I know Matt has thanked you. I want to thank you. I know everyone out there is going to want to thank you, because this has been super, super insightful. And I definitely echo Matt's sentiment that I would love to do this again and maybe get into some more of those specifics that we couldn't quite get to about.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I had a quite a long career wrestling and wrestled many matches in many places. So I've got tons of stories. So, I mean, we've only kind of cracked the surface of what I got to do as a wrestler, and I'm really proud of it. It's led me to the things that I'm doing now, which is really fun. I've got to do some cool stunt work on some big movies and stuff because of my wrestling background, which is awesome. So yeah, man, I got tons of stories. So I'd love to come back on and pick up where we left off.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Best Wrestling Podcast. Once again, you can check us out on social media. We are on Instagram. We are on Twitter. We're on what's called Best Wrestling Podcast at podbean.com, on Anchor FM, and of course, the Facebook. Jonathan, where else can our friends find us?
Well, if you want to find us on any of those, we're not only on them posting, but we're also available for direct messages on them. So slide into our DMs, like the cool kids say, and we can certainly talk about anything you want to talk about, or gladly take show suggestions or questions for our Q&A. And just if I may, want to end off here, a special shout out to longtime show supporter and super fan, Danny Ellis. He's been a big fan of ours from the start. And I want you guys, if you can get a chance, check out his show. It's called Podcast Yet to Be Named, which I think is actually a clever and great title, quite frankly. Just three guys, two former wrestlers. They used to be on the Southern Cali scene in the ring, but now they have a podcast sharing their love of wrestling through show reviews about shows that mean something to them. So they all have a little special connection or tie with the show. So it's at @yet_to-be-named on Twitter, and it's Podcast Yet to Be Named. Check it out. Great guy, great show. As for Best Wrestling Podcast, sorry, Danny, we got to be the best. You know, it's right in our name after all, so we don't want to breach our contract to cyberspace. We're Best Wrestling Podcast, and baby, we've only just begun.